This time on Poll Hub, our latest America Now index is out, and we have enough trend in it to have some interesting observations. Well, correction, we always have interesting observations, but you know what I mean. Then with all the focus on Trump v. Biden, it's important to note that control of the Senate is also at stake. There are some very big races in a bunch of states, some pretty unsuspected this time around. We're going to take a look. So let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll. Well, as we near the end of another month, we know we're thinking a lot about Election Day, but that's not all we poll about too. We've been polling for the last several months now, the America Now National Outlook Index. And each time towards the mid to late end of the month, we do a check-in of what the index is showing about how Americans feel life is going in the country under a number of different areas of their lives, which includes the economy, health, their community, and government. I think I forgot one.
No, I was counting.
Forget one?
Yeah.
Did I get them all, the four of them? So Lee, would you like to give us a sense of how things are going in the country right now?
Well, I think the numbers are showing a similar at the macro level, a similar overall index. We've been doing this in May, and certainly the full-blown index since June. And right now we're seeing that the overall on a 0 to 10 scale is 6.5, which is just sort of okay, I guess, somewhat cautionary note, maybe lukewarm. And that's comparable to what we've seen in the past, where
last
the numbers
time in September.
6.4. So certainly that. But I think one of the things I thought was interesting is I identified two of the subcategories. So we asked 4 questions for each of the overall economic, health, government, and community categories. And I thought that there were 2 that jumped out at me, and we'll see if you guys share this observation. One, under the economic index, there was a sense of, is this a good time to make purchases or investments? And here we saw the second largest change of any of the indices that we were looking at. Were in September, it was a 5.4. This one went down 0.3 to a 5.1, which I think reflects a certain economic uncertainty that's going on right now, and whether people are thinking of, what may have been a quieter, perhaps more upbeat time in September, where people were thinking coronavirus wasn't as serious for the fall. Maybe we're getting ahead of it, and now people don't feel that way. And related to that, I think we saw also in the largest change, which was 0.4, in a drop from 6.2 to 5.8 on the question of whether people think there's little risk to their health right now. And that 5.8, so the drop suggests that people are feeling a little more tentative about their health. So I saw these two as connected. The idea that you're gonna, worry about the whole health situation, the coronavirus, and how that might be affecting the economy in terms of whether you're thinking of making purchases and long-term investments. That was my biggest takeaway. Some of the numbers that we've seen in the past about government and society continue to be lower. People do have a positive feeling about the community they live in. So I think that's the highest at 7.5. And we do these as red, yellow, and green. And that one does get into the green, which is the more positive zone. But everything else is sort of, healthcare right on the border, and the others are in the cautionary yellow color. So I think indexes are kind of interesting because we're doing the same thing month after month, and it's a little refreshing not to be talking about, the blue collar vote in Wisconsin, although we will be again soon.
Well, I can't help but bring it back to the election because this is something that is just days away. But we have seen in our other polling that the issues of coronavirus and the issue of economy have almost kind of merged together. Do you think what you're seeing, the numbers that you pointed out, Lee, but Jay, you can weigh in too. Do you think this sense that people are a little worried about, I shouldn't say a little, people are significantly worried about the economic future and their economic future, and this also sense that we may be going into another period with infections rising, that has had an impact on just people's outlook of how the overall economy is going, and perhaps plays into a little bit the fact that Trump has declined in terms of people's impressions of his ability to guide the economy.
Yeah, well, I would just say, yes to all of that. I thought it was very interesting, though, that the numbers that are dropped, which we've been talking about, they were comparable to this way back in July, where people were sort of feeling maybe the summer things were going to turn around a little bit. September was a positive, more positive time with the changing season, and now it's reverted back to the kind of concern. So I think it's very tied and connected to a perception that, how are we doing with COVID-19? How are we doing with the coronavirus?
Almost certainly much better on a lot of these measures than it was in May. When we were in the midst of the rising infection rates. And
two things that stuck out to me were when we actually look at the groups. One of the things we have not talked about in the index very much, but I think is really interesting, is we do break it down into subgroups, right? We look at men and women and by race and ethnicity and all these kinds of things. And women are significantly less positive about the economy than men. And the other thing that we were looking at was in the area of society and government. And the questions we ask there are, do you feel like people in leadership positions are working to make your life better? You feel you have access to the same opportunities as everybody else? Your children and grandchildren will have a better life than you? And do you feel you live in a society that's fair and just? African Americans and Latinos were much, much more positive than whites about whether they thought their children and grandchildren would have a better life to live. Yet it was the opposite of that. Whites were much more positive than African Americans or blacks and Latinos on, do you feel like you live in a society that is fair and just? I found that really interesting because there are two questions in the same battery that have really polar opposite results depending on ethnicity. And I think it gets at how in the index, things don't necessarily move very much in any index. They're slow moving and they're icebergs, right? They're very slow. And you see changes over time. But inside these batteries that we ask, I think there's some really interesting data that gets at the complexity of American life as we become a really, really plurality-based, no majority, right? A plurality-based society where there's a plurality of one group versus another as opposed to an absolute majority. And I think we're starting to see that in some of these batteries inside this index.
Yeah, and I think, that's a really good point, Jay, because I think that is very interesting. And people of color are definitely much more likely to be positive about not only their own future, but in particular, the future of their children. I think that speaks to, a lot of the, positive things that have occurred, and a sense that we are having discussions in this country that we have had difficulty having in the past. I think the other point that you were making regarding gender is very, very stark. Women really have a much more pessimistic view of the economy than men. And I don't think that's totally surprising when we look at some of the employment numbers that came out. 618,000 women have left the workforce compared with 78,000 men. during this time period. I think that a lot of the issues related to COVID impact women probably disproportionately, and certainly women of color. They're more likely to have jobs in retail and service industries, those that have been particularly impacted by the coronavirus. So it is pretty stark in these numbers, and will certainly be something that we'll be watching.
So before we leave the index, I just want to note that this, as Lee noted, this is something that we're going to continue to do. So one of the things that is going to happen in 10 days from now or so, when there's an election, is we're hopefully going to stop doing polls about Trump versus Biden. Hopefully,
Although you never know. You know, election day isn't always just an election day.
It could go into extra innings, Jay. You know
Okay,
that. We live that.
But I don't know that we'll be polling that. Let's hope not. Although after the hanging chads never mind. Okay. Anyway, but so we're going to continue this, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see whether there's a change in administration or not. What happens to the index?
Absolutely.
Again, they're slow-moving things. We'll see if they remain slow-moving depending on what happens. But there is an election, and so let's talk about the part of the election we have talked about somewhat in some of our state polls, but that's the Senate. And before we talk about any of the specific races, I just want to put one thing out there. 7 of the 10 most expensive races in American history are happening in this cycle. One of them is in Montana, where they've spent something like $200 or $300 million, some huge number. You could buy the state for that. It's incredible. There's only 1 million voters in the whole state. So anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest. What are we looking at in the Senate, and what are the polls showing us, including some of our own polls, about the prospects of the Senate flipping from Republican to Democrat, or not?
Yeah, let me just start out by saying that this is the class of 2014. And what that means is obviously Senator's term is 6 years. And so what we're looking at for 2020 are the people who, if they're running for reelection, ran in 2014. And so because that was the last off-year election, the second midterm election for Barack Obama, it was not his best time in office, and it was a good Republican year. So right now, what goes around comes around. What that means is for 2020, we have a lot more Republicans up for grabs and being competitive or vulnerable, depending on who they are, than Democrats. And that's why you're hearing about so many seats that are being contested, and the potential, forgetting about Biden and Trump and whether this is a blue wave or not, just the potential for the Democrats to flip the Senate because of the underplay of these factors and just the context of it. And of course, it's 47 Democrats and 53 Republicans going in. And for those of you who like to add things up on your fingers, well, if Democrats carry 3 plus the White House, that makes 4, and that gets them over because the vice president breaks the tie. That's assuming they don't lose anybody, but the likelihood is they're going to lose probably Alabama, maybe somewhere else, and then that means they need to take 4 or 5, and that depends again whether takes the oath of office.
So, Barb, what states?
So that's my context.
Barb, what states are interesting to you?
Well, I think also the point you made about the dollars is just astronomical. I mean, the Democrats are not only mobilized to vote, but they were also voting with their pocketbooks. And the Democrats raised an incredible amount of money this time around. Lee pointed out that there are a couple of the seats that the Democrats, are teetering on, or as he mentioned, the one in Alabama, Doug Jones. He squeaked through the last time with an opponent that had some sexual allegations against him, and this time doesn't look like he is going to be able to get across the finish line. Also in a state that Trump is likely to carry by significant numbers. The other seat that is also interesting for the Republicans, which they have poured a lot of money into, is the seat in Michigan. where they have Gary Peters is the incumbent Democrat there, and the Republicans have a strong candidate in James, and that has been a teeter-totter kind of election back and forth. I think the latest numbers show them both in the low 40s, 43, 42. Peters with the 1 point. I don't want to even call it a lead because it's not statistically. They're going into the wire. The thought is if Biden can do well in Michigan and win Michigan, he may pull Peters over the finish line with him. But that is certainly something to watch on election night. The big races too, I actually do follow a bit of the presidential states as well. North Carolina, where we see Republican incumbent Tillis in a very close race with his Democratic opponent. Cunningham had been doing better again until he had his little sexting debacle. But I think a lot depends upon which presidential candidate is going to win those states. Iowa too, Joni Ernst, who had some difficulty in her last debate against her opponent Teresa Greenfield. She couldn't couldn't remember the price of soybeans, which you've only got two things in Iowa: corn and soybeans. Greenfield got corn and she got soybeans and fumbled that one. But again, I think a lot of these Senate races are going to depend upon whether the presidential candidate can pull them over. I know, Lee, you're fond of pointing out that I think last time when we looked at the Senate, 100% of the senators that won matched the presidential candidate that also took that state. It's not usually that high, but it is up there in the very high probabilities.
I would jump in also, Barb, and mention Colorado is a likely Democratic pickup. And in Maine, that's a kind of like Susan Collins, has been in trouble there. And that's one also. I saw some numbers, and I think I would recommend that, occasionally there's a poll in a state, and don't be swung by or swayed or influenced by, one single poll. But we did see some folks did work in Minnesota, and they saw that race had gotten very close. But again, I think word to the wise, because of the quality differences in polls, wait to see if that's a pattern or not. But I did think you don't get a lot of fun watching this race, but I did think the Iowa debate, where I must add that Joe Biden is now ahead of Donald Trump in Iowa, to your point, Barb. But I did find that debate exchange at least a rare moment in our politics.
Of course, Georgia has both senators up
Yes.
time, so that will be certainly something to watch, particularly with the enormous early vote that we've seen there as well. I think two other seats have gotten a lot of attention and a ton of money. Graham in South Carolina, likely to hold on to a seat, and McConnell in Kentucky, again, tons of money were spent in both of those races, but both incumbents very likely to hold on to their seats.
I think for most people, they don't follow the Senate very closely, but you guys have mentioned the names, and that's what I think is interesting. Lindsey Graham, everybody knows who he is in a very tight race, could lose, could win. Mitch McConnell's up, although probably not. And Susan Collins, these are names that people know. I don't think they know most of these other names that we've been talking about. So those are the races that I think on election night are going to get the most attention. But the bottom line is, it does matter who the numbers are. It doesn't matter who the people are. It matters what the numbers are. And so very briefly, we've got like 30 seconds left here. Just let's go around the room. What does it mean if Joe Biden wins, but the Republicans hold the Senate? Let's just take that one. There's other options, but take that one, because that's the one that is probably the most interesting to me. What happens, Lee?
Yeah, Mitch McConnell, if he continues as majority leader, has never been eager to move ahead with court nominations that Democratic presidents make, and that's just not for the Supreme Court. That was a whole bunch of circuit court during the Obama years. I think we're into basic, gridlock, not unlike what we saw during the Obama years.
Sure, it's 2012 part two. Barb, what do you think that holds if that was to happen?
Yeah, maybe I'm just a little bit more of an optimist, but I think there's a sense on both sides that things need to get moving. And Joe Biden, I think, may be the person that has a long history with a lot of these folks. I know that's been a downside to him in the campaign, that he's part of the swamp. But I think that actually may change the dynamics from what we have seen in the last few years.
I actually agree in that scenario. I think that it's not about Mitch McConnell. He'll want to be about Mitch McConnell, but I think there's enough Republicans, and that means one or two, that may break off and that may find a little bit of a middle road. A Lisa Murkowski might actually become an independent, for instance, or something like that. The Republican Party's brand is if this were to happen, is, even if they were still in charge of the Senate, is pretty damaged. And a lot of Republicans are looking to 2024 because that's their next opportunity. So we'll see. I think
Jay, you took the words right out of my mouth, and I was going to say, okay, I am not going to mention 2024 in the next presidential race, at least until maybe 3 or 4 weeks from now.
Great. Well, that'll do it for this edition. Seriously, we will be talking about 2024 in the future. There's plenty of time to talk about it. But that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith is our stellar executive producer. Casey Schaff's our editor. Amelia Morel, Leo Ruiz, Madeline Jones, and Marcella Bettman are our production assistants. It takes a village to get this thing on the air.
Thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University for providing us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. We always love to do that. And if you have questions or comments, please reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and probably anywhere else you want to look.
And then also you might want to go to our website if you're into the index numbers that we talked about. There's a lot of stuff in there, which I think you'll find interesting. We do, and we enjoy actually doing that project, and we will be continuing, as we mentioned, from month to month, going into either the second Trump administration or the new Biden administration. But if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please do consider leaving a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews, I'm told, help others find us. So that's a much more advanced notion of social media than I certainly possess. And while you're at it, go, I'm making myself very popular with my colleagues. Go ahead and subscribe.
Mary's face is in her hands.
I've done worse, Mary, when you've been producing programs for us over the years than that one. But anyway, we always say to be safe at the end of this, and we certainly mean that in all sincerity. Times are getting a little rougher on COVID-19, and we have to stay the course with it, because as Dr. Fauci says, you can't make the timetable for the virus. It makes the timetable for you. So,
amen.
Be wary of all these things. But anyway, we will catch up with you next week.